Women's health needs innovation and creativity. It needs everybody to look at it in a new way.
There is a difference in the biology.
There is just this massive data gap when it comes to the female body.
It's not a women's health problem, it's a problem.
The immune responses are very, very different. In response to a pathogen threat, a male immune system will launch the Army. The female immune system will launch the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Marines.
This past June, WHAM hosted a celebration in D.C. for the 30th anniversary of the Revitalization Act of 1993.
30 years since women and people of color were finally included in NIH clinical trials.
I think it's time we do something. An anniversary should re-energize with a purpose.
3, not 30. We don't want to have to wait 30 more years for many great things to happen.
Women's health research isn't just good science, it's a good investment.
We need to affect long-term change. We just can't invest blindly.
I'm going to be signing the presidential memorandum to establish the first ever White House initiative on women's health research.
Thank you, WHAM.
It's up to us, all women, to create the changes that we set forth today so that women and society flourish.
We can do this in 3 years. Let's not wait 30.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Carol Lee, founder and CEO of WHAM, Women's Health Access Matters. And on behalf of WHAM and our partners at KPMG Northwell Health's Katz Institute for Women's Health, I thank you for joining us for what promises to be a very thought-provoking and hopefully a very impactful conversation. Today's dialogue comes at an incredibly pivotal moment for women's health, and I'm thrilled to announce the official launch of the WHAM Investment Collaborative, a groundbreaking partnership bringing together top-tier investment leaders to unlock the tapped potential within women's health. This first-of-its-kind initiative unites multi-billion-dollar funds like Insight Partners, L. Catterton, Lightstone Ventures, North Pond Ventures, RA Capital, and UPMC Enterprises to accelerate innovation and ignite a seismic shift in investment in women's health and innovations. And this is just the beginning for us. But why now? Because women's health represents one of the most untapped opportunities in healthcare and investment today. When less than 2% of healthcare venture funding currently supporting women's health innovations, we're not only missing out on improving health outcomes for women, but we're also leaving significant financial returns on the table. Through the WHAM Investment Collaborative, we aim to double venture capital investment in women's health companies and innovations by 2026, strengthen investor awareness and engagement, and publish influential reports like the upcoming WHAM Investment Report to be released this January. This collaborative is a cornerstone of WHAM's 3 Not 30 initiative, driving transformative change in sex-based research and innovation over the next 3 years and not waiting another 30. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from exceptional leaders who bring a very unique perspective to this space. A leading healthcare investor offering insights into the broader market opportunity, a prominent investor from a specialized women's health fund working to close gaps in targeted investment, a visionary entrepreneur who has successfully raised capital and is actively fundraising for the next round. With their perspectives, we will provide a dynamic and insightful dialogue on the strategies, challenges, and opportunities in this critical sector. But today's conversation is about more than just funding. It's about seizing the opportunity to drive information and innovation, transform healthcare, and deliver outsized economic and societal returns. Whether you're an investor, a healthcare leader, or someone passionate about progress, this discussion is a chance to explore what's next and how we can all and should all play a role in shaping it. And now it is my pleasure to introduce a dear friend, a wonderful colleague, and our moderator, Jess Federer, who's a strategic advisor to our brand new WHAM Investment Collaborative. She's the chair of the New York Stock Exchange Health of Women Investor Summit and a former chief digital officer at Bayer. Jess, I can't thank you enough for your friendship, for the great efforts that you and I have made in bringing this to life. And I'm so looking forward to having this dialogue with you.
Thank you, Carol Lee. What an inspiring introduction. And as we are announcing the first WHAM Investment Collaborative today, I have to thank you yet again for being a trailblazer in the space and convening us all together and creating the platform that really is the foundation for some 3 not 30 progress that we are all going to be so excited to see realized. Thank you for bringing us together today. So with that, I'd like to welcome all of you to this webinar. We have some phenomenal panelists that are joining us today representing generalist investors, specialized investors, and the founders in the health of women space that Carolee was speaking about. So I'm going to start with some introductions so that we can get to know the leaders in this space. As Carolee said, my name is Jessica Federer. My background is in data and digital and technology. I was the chief digital officer at Bayer, where I ran digital for the global pharma, consumer care, crop science, and animal health businesses. And that's really where my interest in women's health started, because I saw firsthand the data gap, and the data gap that is infinitely solvable with more investment. I'm on the board of Angelini Ventures, an incredible new venture group out of Rome that is investing in women's health groups. I'm a senior advisor to McKinsey and on the board of Sage Therapeutics, which has launched a new product in women's health that's making a difference today. So with all that background, I'm particularly excited for this discussion, and I'd like to ask Alexandra Linden to begin. Alexandra is the Vice President in Healthcare at Insight Partners. Alexandra, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jess and Carolee. I'm so excited to be here and just to have an open conversation about such an important topic. So, like Jess said, I'm a vice president on Insight's healthcare team. I'll kind of get into the Insight spiel and kind of the angle we're coming from. But first, I can tell you guys a little bit about my journey to contextualize where I'm coming from. So I've been in the investment world for 7 years. Before that, I thought I was going to have an academic career. I'm trained in computer science and finance, wanted to apply the computer science side into the world of health. And so I actually started, and this becomes relevant to our conversation that I hope we dig into later, but I actually started with a research project talking about or trying to understand kind of how behavioral health conditions manifested themselves differently through speech based on gender, which lots of, as I'm sure you can imagine, interesting takeaways there. But so kind of started there, evolved into how could I focus on the application of compute in biology and neuroscience. Anyway, thought I would continue that after a brief stint in the world of venture capital, but here I am still. And so at Insight, it's a really interesting evolution of the company. So Insight's been around for 30 years. We really have 2 core pillars, growth and software. And so what I mean by growth is anything from kind of, your earliest innings of, starting to generate revenue and starting to see that high growth all the way to the very end of the spectrum, pre-IPO rounds, take privates, LBOs. Like we really kind of counterintuitively cover everything. It's because our goal is to find the world's best software companies, regardless of stage, regardless of geography. And so we kind of pride ourselves in that flexibility. And what we bring to the table is to kind of partner along that journey are a very large team of ex-consultants, ex-operators who are kind of functional experts to partner with our businesses to help them get through every kind of hurdle and pass every milestone to scale from 1 to 10 to 100 plus million in revenue. When it comes to healthcare, so like I said, I kind of have this bias coming into the world of investing, and really this comes from just interest and enthusiasm for the space. Like I know everyone here, everyone listening, everyone on this panel has had either a personal experience, a friend, a family member who has gone through healthcare challenges. Like healthcare is hard to navigate for anyone, but even more challenging to navigate as a woman or someone from an underserved community. And so coming into investing, I just kind of had this bias, like how do we really change the world through, finding these best companies who can really kind of accelerate innovation. Insight is historically never verticalized. Like I said, best software businesses across any vertical. But what we realized, and this was really 3 or 4 years ago, is that we weren't going to be able to make profound change without a focused approach in this category in particular. There's so much underlying complexity. I don't need to explain probably to anyone that's tuning in, but whether it's from a buyer perspective or a patient perspective, or just figuring out a go-to-market to kind of unlock this ecosystem, there are so many nuances that just require a more focused approach. And so we kind of slowly started this evolution towards driving a healthcare focused team. I kind of started with investment in the technology for life sciences space. That kind of unlocked enthusiasm internally. And what happened at the end of last year is Insight really officially verticalized my team. And so we're small society. We are healthcare focused, which to anyone who spends time in healthcare is kind of funny because it's so broad. But we're too small to have these kind of like niche focus areas yet. And we're kind of building along that evolution. But really kind of the purpose here is how do we meet founders innovating in this category where they are with the resources we want to bring to bear to any vertical, but with a healthcare flavor. And we kind of just realize you can't just, have your pure B2B SaaS serving a lot of these players. Like you have to have like a software plus, you have to have like, whether it's just software plus extra empathy or software plus services and some sort of enablement layer to really drive acceleration here. That's kind of the angle we're coming from. And so anyway, lots to get into there. But I'm just excited to be here, excited to hit a lot of topics, and hopefully it's something that's, I'd like to be really candid and just figure out ways we can really drive more access, innovation, and outcomes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alexandra. We're definitely excited that you're investing in world-changing companies as well, and thrilled that you're here. I'd like to now introduce Oriana Papin-Zogby. Oriana is a founder in the ovarian oncology, ovarian cancer space, and she is someone that I've had the pleasure of knowing for some years now, and I've been continually impressed not only by her dedication, but by her delivery and making progress. Oriana, can you tell us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jess. And thank you, Carolee and WHAM, for bringing us all together for an incredibly important conversation. So by way of background, I started my career in women's health right out of college. This was over 15 years ago now, before women's health or the health of women was a category that anybody discussed. It was just part of diagnostics or part of therapeutics or whatever space you were in. And I started at an early stage company that was developing a test to be able to diagnose if a woman's water had broken too early in pregnancy. So this was a point of care test that was really important because this could lead to pretty terrible outcomes for women. And we were a small and incredibly nimble company, and we got that test out of research. We were able to get it approved by the FDA, approved in numerous countries all over the world, and launched that on the market. And we're able to gain market traction in the US and internationally. And actually, for the first time, I got to see, okay, the impact of innovation into patient care, into health system care, into different areas of the journey for a woman as she was, pregnant and scared if she had a terrible outcome. So that gave me a flavor, both for women's health, but also for the startup journey. While I was at Amnesia, we were fortunately acquired by a large strategic diagnostic company. They were based in Germany, and I was offered a role to go and work with them on their up-and-coming women's health division based out of their headquarters in Germany. So I moved over to Germany and expanded my experience on go-to-market for a number of women's health products. So at the time, we were working on the Amnesia line, but also a lot on HPV screening, cervical cancer, infectious diseases. And most of my work actually left the US and was now focused on low resource developed area, with this theme of how do you translate tools and technology and innovation that has been developed for labs and clinics in much more developed places, and actually increase that access to patients all over the world that don't have the same infrastructure. And at that time, that became my pet project. I spearheaded one of the biggest HPV screening programs in Africa. It was a collaboration between the QIAGEN and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And this entire concept that cervical cancer is the only cancer in the world that is 100% eradicable. Yet today's society has not eradicated it. And it's not because the tools don't exist. It is absolutely because the tools exist. We have means for HPV screening. We have means for HPV vaccines, but it's access. It's getting it out to patients. It's getting it out to women. And what I faced at that point early in my career was twofold. Partially was driving large companies to focus, to make sure that in their budgets for the year, there was budget for us to do the work that we needed to do to get access to this testing, to get regulatory approvals, whatever it was, even internal investment, to make the business case for internal investment so that we could focus on this. But on the flip side is navigate the complexities of going to market. I was working in the Middle East. I was working in Africa. And by working, I was boots on the ground. I have gone out to parts that had no access to like electricity on vans for 8 hours to make sure we could access women at their testing. And a lot of what we faced was, well, HPV is a taboo. We don't want to talk about this. We don't want to get testing. And so just the multitude of challenges that you face in this space is quadrupled, I believe, to what is experienced in other indications or in other parts of health. From there, we ended up working on another startup company back in Boston that spun out of QIAGEN at the time. And the reason it spun out was because internally, they were not going to dedicate the resources to it. So this everlasting battle of how are we going to get the resources to develop things that are needed in women's health? And the conversation we were having in the prep to this is the challenge isn't a lot of the time that these solutions don't exist. Sometimes they absolutely don't. The biology isn't there yet, or the therapeutic hasn't been developed. But more often than not, the solutions exist and they're not getting to market. And 99% of the time, it falls down to resourcing, whether it's funding, whether it's prioritization, whatever it means, it's resourcing. And so we had to spin out an entirely separate company, go and raise venture capital to bring a test that could predict if a woman was going to go into preterm birth, that has huge outcomes on the woman, on the healthcare system, and on that baby. We were able to do that and able to get that test approved by the FDA as a class 3, only for QIAGEN to reacquire us again. And that's just like a perfect example of how you have to think so creatively after you have to work outside of the box to get your solutions in women's health out there. So I'd had all these experiences over, so it's about a 10-year lapse. So startup, large companies, spinning out, et cetera. And my co-founders and I, Anna and Alex and myself, we'd worked together those entire 10 years. We'd done AmniSure, we'd gone through the acquisition with QIAGEN, we'd done Parsogen, we'd sold back to QIAGEN. We were never founders at the time, but we were early stage operators. We'd gotten so much experience. Again, that transition of how do you get really exciting research and how do you actually navigate it into a product that actually has value in the clinical system? How do you get resources for it, et cetera? So we were sitting there after the second acquisition, and we didn't have the desire to go back to big corporate. And we wanted to keep having an impact. And we said, how do we keep having an impact? How do we start to break this chain? And we found a statistic at the time that said 90% of medical innovation stays in academia. And for us, that was just flabbergasting. Back to the point earlier that these solutions likely exist in some form, even if it's in early research, and there's a bridge missing to translate it out. And we knew our passion was women's health, passion that was mostly fueled by indignation of how terrible the status quo was, how underinvested it was, how under-researched, how under-prioritized. And so we said, okay, let's bring that passion to an area where we know that we could have a big impact. And our focus has always been diagnostics, because at the end of the day, how do you know what you're going to treat if you don't know where the underlying problem is? And so we went out, and the conception around AOA was, how do we bring really exciting medical research in women's health out of the academic setting, out of research, and bring it to market so it can have an impact? And we designed what we call the 3P triangle on patients, on providers, and on payers, right? If we can find solutions that can ensure a positive outcome for all three, we know we can have a big impact on the healthcare system. And so we went out knocking doors. We went to tech transfer offices. We went to academic researchers. We scoured patent filings. We went to conferences, looked at abstracts, posters, and we hunted for research that was groundbreaking, specifically in women's health. So much of the time when we had these conversations with tech transfer offices, they kept wanting to show us, well, I have this in lung cancer, or I have this here. And we were so focused, and we said, absolutely only what's in women's health. And after many a no's, we eventually met with a professor. This was late 2019, before the entire world shut down. And he was working on novel biomarker class. So novel molecules that are circulating in the blood and that can help indicate the early signs of cancer. And very serendipitously, solely because his next door neighbor lab was the head of the Gynecology Oncology Society in Canada and happened to have ovarian cancer samples lying around, decided to test his hypothesis on ovarian cancer. And it was like serendipity that brought us together. One of my advisors at the time, her mother had passed away of ovarian cancer. She was at a conference in Montreal, heard of the work he was doing, called me, said, I found what you're looking for, come to Montreal. And that was the genesis of how AOA started, this groundbreaking research that had application in women's health. And a vision of a team that wanted to make a difference. And the reason we were so gung-ho about ovarian cancer is because 80% of women today are diagnosed stage 3 and 4, and the 5-year survival rate is 28%. I don't see those statistics in prostate cancer. I don't see those statistics in testicular cancer. I don't see those statistics in many other cancers, actually. Ovarian cancer is the second most expensive cancer to treat in the US, second only to brain cancer. And lo and behold, treatment exists for stage 1 and stage 2 that today would give them a 90% survival rate. So we don't even have to wait for treatment. All we have to do is find that disease earlier. And somehow there's absolutely no way to do this in our entire healthcare system all over the world. There's no way to do this. And so when we came across this research and this huge unmet need, we have funneled everything over the past 5 years into making sure that we can develop this innovation into a product. We can prove that this product is safe and can take it through the FDA. We can prove that this is cost effective for the healthcare system and that there's a benefit to patients and to providers, and we can bring it to market. And to just touch on the topic at hand today about funding, today we've raised $24 million. No easy feat whatsoever, and I'm happy to talk about that in that conversation. But one of the biggest challenges we face as a company is getting the money we need to do this. Nobody debates the problem is not a problem. Everybody agrees it's a problem. Everybody agrees it's unjust. Everybody agrees on the economics around how big the market is. But still, it's challenging to raise venture dollars for a business like ours. And I'll leave it at that so we can talk about it in the session. Thank you.
I won't quite let you leave it at that. I would like, if you could, Oriana, could you tell our listeners what the current standard is for diagnostic of ovarian cancer, which will then explain why a non-invasive diagnostic is so critical?
Yeah, absolutely. So today, over 90% of women that have ovarian cancer experience non-specific symptoms. These are things such as repeated abdominal pain, changes in bowel movements, feeling full too quickly. As you can imagine, especially as a woman gets older, none of this really screams cancer. And it's repeated enough that 87% of women seek medical care. They go to a doctor and they tell a doctor something is wrong. I know something is wrong. There is nothing to assess for ovarian cancer at that point. What they do is go through a process of differential diagnoses to rule out, could this be IBS? By the way, there's no diagnostic for that either. Could there be endometriosis? There's also no non-invasive way to diagnose that either. Could this be pregnancy? Okay, we can do a pregnancy test. And so they just go and they try to rule out a bunch of different things. At that point, they also do imaging, so a transvaginal ultrasound. But ovarian cancer, misleading in its name, actually begins along the fallopian tube in very small mets. And you have to have a mass of at least 1.5 centimeters to be visualized on any imaging. 1.5 centimeters is typically late stage disease, so can't be picked up through imaging. And now there's a blood test called CA-125, only approved by the FDA to monitor once a woman already has ovarian cancer to see if it's getting worse or if it's getting better. But because there's no other alternative, they'll do that. They'll ask a woman to come back again 3 months later. They'll see if those numbers are rising, redo imaging. We're not sure yet. Come back again 3 months later. Because the only way to confirm ovarian cancer is to send her to surgery. And in that surgery, they have to surgically remove the full fallopian tube and the ovary just to get a diagnosis. So the clinicians are standing there saying, the likelihood it's ovarian cancer is low. I don't want her to send her to this life-changing surgery. But if I don't send her and I keep monitoring and I keep wait and see, the ovarian cancer is going to spread. Because early stage tumors double every 4 months. And on average in the US, it takes 9 months to get a diagnosis. So that woman's tumor has doubled twice just while she's sitting in the healthcare system. On average, she sees 4 different specialties before getting diagnosed. 30% of women are sent to a mental health care specialist and prescribed an antidepressant for their pain before eventually being diagnosed with ovarian cancer. 10% are sent to get a colonoscopy before eventually getting diagnosed with ovarian cancer. So they're living hell, only to be told 9 months later that the likelihood that they'll survive is only 28%. And so that, again, that indignation, that's what's fueled us. That's what said there has to be a better way. And we're going to make that better way happen with really exciting research that had not been proven before we came along. It's been 4 years. We've de-risked a lot. We've proven a lot. And there is still a step to go. We have to get our FDA approval. We have to make sure we get reimbursement. That's something that we are so adamant about. More often than not, the cost falls on women in testing. There's so much in the world of fertility or even endometriosis where there's no way to get reimbursement, so let's ask the women to pay for the testing. And we have a profound philosophy around making sure we can get the right coverage of this to not put the burden of cost on women, especially when it comes to cancer diagnosis. So there's a journey to go from here. But as Jess alluded to, the standard of care is so bad that this isn't something that would just be just a little bit better or incrementally better. This would be life-changing for women.
Thank you, Ariana. I think now everyone listening is sharing your indignation that in 2024, a woman has to have an ovary and fallopian tube removed to confirm a cancer diagnosis. There is a better way, and we are so grateful that you are bringing this science forward to help all of the women that we know afflicted with this disease. Now I'd like to introduce a dear friend and my fellow co-chair for the New York Stock Exchange Women's Health Investor Summit, Dr. Alice Zhang. Alice has a phenomenal background, and right now she's investing in healthcare as a partner at Foreground Capital. Alice, please introduce yourself and tell us about your story.
Great. Thank you so much to Jessica, Carolee, and the whole team, and great to be among familiar faces. We are actually proud investors in AOA. So as for my background, I've been in women's health for my whole career, wearing different hats. First in global public health. For this, I worked in East Africa and Asia on women's health issues, oftentimes without running water or electricity, so have a view on that. Then I went into medical school in medicine and almost became an OBGYN. I did a lot of rotations. I applied to residency. I ultimately did not pursue that path fully as I became interested in the business side of healthcare and ended up in business school and then at McKinsey for a number of years. The through line here is in my work in management consulting, I was a generalist within healthcare across I would say, med tech, pharma, health services, et cetera. But women's health was a big core part of that work. And there weren't enough Fortune 500 clients in women's health to make it a full partner path, but I did as much as I could within that and really built up kind of the women's health knowledge within the firm. And this included landscaping the innovation landscape before I jumped over myself. So I was tracking the number of funds in the space, also the pipeline, how many startups there were, what were investment trends, all of this. This is, at this point, 5-6 years ago, when there really wasn't much information at all on how large is the women's health market size, how robust is that innovation landscape. So ultimately, got very excited about that and ended up leaving consulting myself to go into this area of growth. I looked around and I saw that the innovation wasn't really coming from the incumbents in the space. It really was in the innovation sector, both funds and startups. And I was lucky that this was a time where, venture was really taking off. This is, kind of right before, actually during COVID. And there were a small handful of dedicated funds at that time. And I joined RH Capital, which is one of the largest and oldest dedicated funds in the space. We have now spun out into a new fund called Foreground Capital that is still managing the previous RH Capital funds as well. And just to share a little bit more about the approach, RH Capital as well as now Foreground. So as I mentioned, this is one of the few dedicated funds, which means our entire investment thesis is focused on women's health. So the topic area has to be something that affects women. Originally, we were doing only exclusively affecting women. Now, as Foreground Capital, we've expanded the aperture to include conditions that affect women differently or disproportionately. We do invest very broadly across health segments. So on any given day, we're looking at a company in cell and gene therapy, and then in access to care and the whole gamut, which is really fun. We are also at the early stage around seed to Series A. And in fact, all of the women's health dedicated funds are investing at the early stage, We all have, we're all newer in the world of VC and have smaller funds. And lastly, I'll share that, we are very impact focused. We do seek market rate returns, but our approach is very rigorous around the impact that the companies have. So for example, with AOA is really about redefining standard of care for ovarian cancer diagnostics. We have other companies that are addressing access gaps to care, systemic change within care, and or affordability. And we're very proud to have 22 investments, including one exit, and just approved a couple of more. So excited to have a growing portfolio. I know we want to get to the panel discussion. So the last thing I'll just say is that having watched the women's health innovation landscape from different lenses, I'm also a patient as well in many areas. It's been an incredible journey just seeing what's changed in the past 5 years, how the pipeline has grown, the number of funds that are interested has grown, both dedicated funds as well as generalist funds, such as Insight that we heard from earlier, entering into the space. Also, the knowledge that has increased. When I first started looking at the market, there really was not very much published on what the trends were, how large it was, and now there's multiple institutions and groups that are publishing on this, which is incredible. And also public interest has really changed as well, that there's still stigma with many issues, but overall things are moving in the right direction.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alice. So now we're going to get into a little bit of a discussion. And so as a ground setting, I want to just go over some basics. Women are 2/3 of Alzheimer's patients. They are 80% of autoimmune patients. They are still 50% more likely to die in the year after a heart attack than men. And as Oriana very eloquently shared with us, they are dying today from diseases because diagnostics are not accessible, because the burden is too high to even find out if you have ovarian cancer. So we are in a landscape where 52% of the population, the majority of the population, is really disproportionately bearing a burden that is the result of some historic legacy scientific policies where women were not included in research. They were largely prohibited from being in clinical trials until 1993, when they were required to be in federally funded studies. And in many cases, we're still seeing that the representation isn't where it should be, given the size and the demographics of the market. So this does represent a very new and exciting investment field. And often the next question is, well, why is it new? Isn't women's health one of the oldest fields out there? And it's new because the scientific discoveries that we are making now have never been made before. So to put it into context for you, this year, 2024, is the first year that we've ever had imaging of a woman's brain every week during her pregnancy. That's remarkable. So for the first time ever, we're seeing the changes in a woman's brain during her pregnancy. This is the first time in history we've ever had that. It's also the first time in history we've had studies published showing the changes in women's brain before, during, and after menopause. The work of Dr. Lisa Mosconi showing where the activity areas are changing based on the hormone fluctuations. So there is truly new science coming out every day in the space for women's health, and each one of those represents a whole new category of investment, which is why the WHAM Investment Collaborative announced today is so groundbreaking. These leaders coming together, and we'll share the link with you to the announcement, but from Insight Partners, from L. Catterton, from Lightstone Ventures, from North Pond Ventures, from RA Capital, from UPMC, these are leaders that are really making a difference and are dedicated to that long-term sustainable change, and doing it in 3 years. Not 30 years. So that's the question I want to start with for our panelists today is, in the lens of 3, not 30, and the 30 years is, since 1993, when women were first required to be in research, to 2023 last year, in our quest to make changes in 3 years, not 30 years, what would each of you recommend as a very actionable, meaningful step that you want to see done to transform and accelerate that 3, not 30 movement? And I'm going to go in the reverse order. And Alice, I'm going to start with you.
Sure, yeah. And I love this. I love this kind of notion of how do we accelerate change. And I do think that there's different roles that different groups play. There's a role for policy change. There's a role for medical education. There's different stakeholders and different roles. And I do think for those of us on the call, this is the innovation world. And so I think our role is to find the innovations that are game changing and invest in them. And I also love the collaborative because it is, we can't get there alone with the dedicated funds. We sit in a particular part of the spectrum along the continuum of investment, and we need the generalists, the larger players to join us.
Thank you, Alice. Oriana.
Along those lines, we need venture to take risk. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we have faced, and risk across the sector. There has been an increased popularity around digital health and services because it most closely resembles your standard SaaS business models, right? And for most generalists, that's familiar, and that is sort of easy to dip the toes in. And that's going to drive change, but that alone is not going to drive enough change to make a difference in 3 years. That alone will get us there in 30 years. But if what we're trying to do is make a difference in 3 years, we have to take risk. People have to step up and take risk. The generalist funds, the later stage funds who have historically not backed these areas, find something you're so passionate about, work with that team, work with those founders, and back the risk to get that outcome. Because otherwise, we'll get there, but we'll get there in 30 years. We won't do it in 3.
Excellent. Alexandra, we've heard now mention of generalist funds a couple times, and Insight Partners is one of the founding members of this investment collaborative. Tell us what you think would make a big difference in the move to accelerate progress fast.
Well, first, so excited to be part of the investment collaborative, and like the idea is not for that to be a performative thing. Like, how can we join this and actually make change? And Oriana, I actually want to respond to that because it's almost like you prompted me. This was part of the reason why, like at Insight, we decided we needed to focus. And because it allows us to push the boundaries versus come at everything generalist. Like, we're going to be asking the basic questions time and time again. It's not the founders' jobs to keep educating us on what matters. Like, we need to educate ourselves on what matters, and then be able to drive like these thesis-backed investments. And so actually, I think in maybe 24 hours or so, we'll actually be announcing our first investment in the diagnostic space, like that we are actually trying to push the bounds. But one thing I do want to say on like how we can accelerate innovation, I think we're at a really interesting cusp with, Gen AI, obviously, but just a ton of other technological innovations and progressions that are enabling change really rapidly. What we need to do is it's not only investor or founders or investors in women's health, it's anyone innovating in healthcare needs to have women's health top of mind. So I don't want to hear another company that's bringing AI decision support without the female in mind to a health system. Like, we have lived decades with research being entirely biased to men. We have an opportunity to bring in these new systems with all the diversity in mind. Like we need the data sets to be diversified. We need to have this idea of precision medicine with a female in mind, weaving through everything from even your prior auth, like your old workflow solutions, whatever it is, like these things need to have the female in mind. So it's like this accountability when I think about what I need to do, it's like when I'm asking questions, when I'm like on a prospect, call with a new prospect, like it's my job to ask if they have this in mind. And so I think that's the only thing that's really or one of the big things that's gonna help accelerate innovation is this, like, let's let this carry through to every single investment decision, not just let me carve out from Insight's generalist fund, however many dollars of women's health investment, like, let me put that through, like, weave that thesis through every investment I make.
That's very well said.
Can I chime in, Jess?
Yeah, because It's
Yeah,
changing the ecosystem. Instead of telling every car to turn right, you're turning the road right. And this is where, you know, investment groups like Yale Ventures has recently said now for anyone applying for funding, they're going to ask, how are you looking at sex-based differences through every stage of your research, from mouse cells all the way through? And it is on the decision makers that have sort of the gatekeeping power, whether that's an investor or a regulator, to make those changes to the road so that everybody makes the turn. And that is within our policy ability to do, both for the investment vehicles and for the government and for policymakers. Oriana.
No, I absolutely. I was going to say on the regulatory side, you're starting to see some of those mandates come through, right? And so even for us, where we're doing a prospective study, there's a and yes, all of our subjects are women, but even amongst that, there is very clear guidance from the FDA on the diversity of women and how to resemble the population. And I think that's something that can transfer into venture, which is, okay, it's a lung cancer test, okay? You're showing a lung cancer population-based test. Do you resemble the population where 52% of your subjects women, or 20% of your subjects African-American? Like, do you actually resemble the US population if that's the intended market? Or are you, doing what's historically been done, which is study what's easiest to do? And I think creating those standards in the private world can help drive change beyond just specifically women's health. And to a phrasing that Carol Lee's been really smart about using, about the health of women, right? Like I'm stealing this from you, but it goes beyond just what affects our reproductive organs or what exclusively affects women, but it's the health of women beyond that. And that applies to everything in the diagnostic therapeutic world, everything, every single thing. And it's being purposeful about bringing that lens forward to ensure that the change is implemented across the entire healthcare system and not just things that affect our ovaries.
So I'm going to ask all of the panelists what their advice would be that everyone can do, because a lot of the advice that we just talked about is for people in the investment community or in the healthcare community. So what is your advice to your neighbor if they asked, how can I help accelerate the 3 Not 30 goals? But first I want to go to Carol Lee and ask you what you think would be the immediate actions that you'd like to see to help push forward now the WHAM 3 Not 30 goals when it comes to investment.
Oh my goodness, that's a big question, and I'm so enjoying listening to so much of the dialogue. Clearly, the investment collaborative, along with your guidance, Jess, is an opportunity for us to bring together many of the leaders, which we've just started. And so, we're just at the very nascent stages of bringing together all of those who should be part of this. When we can convene like this, then I think we can create a larger voice and larger vision collectively of what will be impactful. So I think we're just starting to think through what does that look like, and you have to have, which everyone has identified, people like all of you on this call and so many others who are passionate, clearly intelligent, passionate, education, dedicated to driving these results. In creating our report, there's a section that we're working on that's called Myths and Misconceptions. So a couple of the things, we all know that there are many myths around women's health, and you alluded to some of them that were in our first report, Jess, of 80% of autoimmune and all the rest. So we know that all of that exists, but we also know the following, that there's a myth about the size of the marketplace. So how is that possible? We're 52% of the population. So all women will go through menopause, as far as I can tell. That's a huge market. I'm not going to start breaking it. It's not 52%. It's all women are going to go through menopause. And you guys can articulate that in many different ways. And there are many diseases that women are affected differentially, exclusively or predominantly. So there's the size of the marketplace, which we have to be cognizant of, which is we're not a niche market. And that is explained in many different ways. I know that I've heard you often just talk about 1 in 10 women will have diabetes, 1 in 10 will have endometriosis. That's not a niche market. And then if we look at how women are not small men. Women are affected by disease differently. Part of this then is about, as we've always done, is about being informative about a lot of this data. And that's part of what WHAM tries to do. But I think the report is going to identify, as our first reports did, a lot of data, which will be very helpful to all of us in trying to create the diversity of change that needs to take place. And we all know that diverse teams, wherever they are more successful than single sex teams. So that's another piece that we're very focused on working on. But let me throw it back to all of you, because I'm so appreciative, obviously, of the great support that WHAM as a not-for-profit has been able to build. But I think we are at a seminal moment. And one other question that I will answer that you asked is, what can we all do? Women have to be more in charge of their health. This is not just about a group of experts. Women have to take charge. And women have to be the ones who say in a doctor's office, has this drug been tested on women? And not take, I don't know, all the kinds of questions that women have to ask in order to maintain and create, not have it take 9 years for a diagnosis of any kind. So let me pass it back to my experts here. You're doing a much better job.
Oh, no, I would love to tag on, because I totally agree. I mean, my two pieces would be challenge the status quo and mainstream it. So challenge means don't accept mediocrity for our care, for our health. Don't suffer in silence. Be outraged, talk to your doctor, talk to others, and then mainstream it. Talk to your partners, your colleagues, your kids. Like, this is a mainstream topic. It's not a hush-hush topic of, oh, this is happening to me, happened to my mother, but we don't address it. Just let's make it mainstream. And what I love, actually, and I'm in a biased world, but my husband sends me Instagram videos and TikTok videos about women's health habits. I'm like, great, I'm glad you're seeing this. This is making it more mainstream.
No,
absolutely.
Go ahead. No, I was just gonna add on. I think, to what you're saying, Alice, like, normalizing discussions about women's health is just, I think we've made progress, but there's so far to go. Like, when you just think about, okay, what we can advertise about and what we can't advertise about, God forbid, everything gets blocked because it's taboo to talk about. Like, the more that you as an individual can just push the conversation, empower people around you with some of these data points that we've been talking about. Like, it is actually insane how, like, when you think about the data disparity, when you think about misdiagnosis, it is painful to hear. And I think that's something that I take for granted knowing, like, pass that along, because I think that will help people really understand the issue. It is really, like, making people accountable for this problem.
Yeah. I would just add, I took a quick scroll at the attendees list. Thank you all for joining. I don't think it's a surprise, but looks like a vast majority are women, just by the names that I'm seeing. And thank you, male allies that are here. I think for the everyday woman that is not, if you're an investor, put money in this. I think that's the call to action. If you're not an investor, I think be a part of the research. And there are so many ways to do that, but we talk about this all the time. There is not enough research. There are not enough data points on sex-based differences. There are not enough studies designed. I mean, what Jess said, this is the first time in the world, in the centuries of time, that a woman's brain has been studied. Historically, women are so distrusting of the healthcare system, rightfully so. I'm not saying that that is unjustified, but rightfully so. But we need to be a part of the change. We need to show up. Look up what research is ongoing at a hospital near you, at a center near you. There are so many ads on social media today. Find a way to get comfortable, vet it, right? Make sure that it is what you want to be doing, maybe something that you care about, something that you're experiencing. I know that there is so much around data privacy these days, and so seek the right guidance as to, do I feel like my data is being appropriately handled? And if you can get there, then volunteer, show up. I remember 3 years ago, I had my first daughter, and I had just given birth, and it was the next day, and I was in the hospital, and a research associate approached me and said, we're looking for women who had just delivered within the last 24 hours to be a part of this research for outcomes, etc. And my husband looked at me and he's like, what are you doing? And in my mind, I was like, paying it forward. If I don't, I know how hard it is to enroll subjects. I know how hard it is to ask a woman 24 hours postpartum to leave, be wheeled downstairs, go spend 2 hours getting imaging. Most people are going to say no. So if I know that and I don't say yes, how am I going to be a part of that change? And so in the times where it's likely inconvenient, where somebody is approaching you with a pamphlet or what it may be, make sure you trust it. But if you can be a data point, if you can help the research, That's another way that we get there in 3 years and not 30 years.
That's excellent advice, Oriana. And I'll even take it one step further. Be in the research and then ask the researcher, what do they need? So some years ago, I was at a dinner with a leading researcher, Dr. Lisa Musconi, in the women's health brain area, and I just asked her, what do you need? And she needed faster enrollment because that's what every researcher needs, because it takes so long to get people to enroll. And you know what? We had a dinner party. I invited every woman I knew in New York City, and I said, there's a catch. Come to dinner, but you're going to hear about research, and I'm going to ask you to see if you're eligible to participate. So don't come to the dinner if you don't want to see if you're eligible to participate, because it's something that all of us can do to bring our friends and family and networks in, to take the stigma and the mystery out of the research, and let the researcher talk to the community and invite people to see if they're eligible. And I still get emails and calls from the women that came to that dinner, that enrolled in the study, that are so grateful for the chance to be part of science, to something that is meaningful, even though it meant giving up their time, going for procedures that they wouldn't have gone for. They loved it because now they're contributing to the science of something they truly care about. And if you cannot be in research for whatever reason, and you're amplifying it, another opportunity available to you is to be on an IRB, an institutional review board. Every single research that is done with individuals, with humans, is approved by an institutional review board. That's an ethics board. And every ethics board is required to have a layperson on it, a community member. And your job as community member is to read those consent forms and say, this doesn't make sense. What's the risk benefit? What's happening here? Am I getting childcare covered? Is my travel to the clinic compensated? Are you paying for the Uber back and forth? So as an IRB member, you can ask those questions and request changes to the protocols and consent forms to ensure that is equitable and accessible to everyone in the community. So there's something all of us can do. I know we're getting close to the end, but I want to get to something very exciting for all of us, and that is to ask each of you, what are the areas in this broader public health, women's health field of areas where women are differently and disproportionately impacted? What are some of the areas that you're particularly very interested in, whether it's neuro or autoimmune or tech platforms or diagnostics? Share with the participants today something that is exciting for you all. Alexandra, would you like to kick us off?
Ooh, so many things to say.
Go for it.
So since you mentioned neuro, then that's, where I thought my background would lead me, that I'm so excited for where we're going to be, 5 years from now, 3 years from now. I think we're on the cusp of real progress. And we've started to really see that. And it so disproportionately impacts women when you think about neurodegenerative disease in particular. And so that's something that I'm personally really focused on. At Insight, I think, and I kind of mentioned this a little bit, and I don't mean to be a broken record, but I think clinical decision support and having the right minds focus on how that actually manifests itself in the clinical setting. We are closer, I think, than many people might believe to have this type of technology, AI-driven technology, truly in the clinical setting, and in the hands of clinicians. And I think it is, when I think about my goals and how I think I can pay the way forward, like you said, Jess, on kind of driving the right type of innovation, it's focusing on these types of platforms that will actually inform the care journey for patients in the right way. So those are two big opportunities. I also think when we think about what impacts women, not necessarily her health in particular, but her world of healthcare, it's women are disproportionately the caregiver. So whether it's when we think about innovation in the world of aging, when we think about innovation and how can caregivers better support the needs of their children, those are the types of things that I think are also really, really exciting. And yeah, so I think maybe those are a couple. I'll let others chime in, but
Alice?
Yep. Yes. I agree a lot with the comments in the chat. For us as a fund, we will continue to focus on areas that are specific to women, and menopause definitely is an area we've been looking in for a while, continue to look in. As I mentioned, we're broadening to the other parts of women's health as well. And there, I'm very excited about autoimmune conditions, which affect women disproportionately, and we don't know why often. Migraine as well as an area. Pain. These are all areas that we want to look more into, kind of in that broader bucket.
Ariana.
Beyond ovarian cancer overall, I think the theme that excites us the most is progress in diagnosis. When we started 808, we landscaped endometriosis, preeclampsia, and a number of other conditions beyond ovarian cancer, and the standard of care is just abysmal. Whether it's the diagnosis takes years, whether that there are no diagnostic tools, whether it's that it is invasive, you can list off a variety of reasons, but that's where we get most excited is when we start to see actual companies going through what is a very difficult journey to develop and bring diagnostics to market, but we're seeing more and more of them take on that risk and take on that ambition to bring really powerful, life-changing diagnostics and improve the standard of care in that journey for women.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to hand it over to Carol Lee to wrap us up and close out today's session. But first, I just want to thank our panelists today for sharing the lens from the entrepreneur, from the builder, to the specialist funds, which are usually the first investors in these companies, to the large generalist funds that help them scale and make it to everyone in the population and get over those bigger hurdles. We've really had a rich, robust discussion, and I think I'm most excited that all of you leaders are coming together and that this is becoming a topic that is mainstreamed, and that we have visionaries and groups like WHAM and Carol Lee that are moving us along forward. So Carol Lee, thank you so much for having us today, and I'll hand it back over to you.
Oh my gosh, Jess, you're amazing, and I love being your partner, and I'm so appreciative of you and this amazing panel. Thank you all for the incredible insights that you offered. I just want to give you a data point, because we were talking about neuroscience, and Emily Bowers, who is a neuroscientist out at UC Santa Barbara, has a terrific video, and in it, there's one remark that was made that I couldn't quite believe it, or data point, and that is that since 1995, 50,000 studies have been done on the brain, but less than 1/2% have been done on the female brain. So let me mention that, and I have a lot of other data like that swirling around in my little brain, but as we think about today's roundtable, I'm going to leave you with this challenge. So I want to know how you, each one of you, can help us seize the opportunity that we have to drive the meaningful, lasting change that we all should have in women's health. And why should we still be talking about this today, that many years later? We make up over half the population and hold immense economic power. And by 2030, they'll be the largest wealth transfer that will have ever happened, where $30 trillion will be transferred to women, who will then control 66% or close to 70% of the wealth in the country. What impact is that going to have on how women think about their health, not only theirs, but the health of their family? But yet investment in our health remains incredibly and disproportionately low, as you've heard, which is just an immense and missed opportunity to advance women's health. It's more than a social imperative, which we know that it is. It's an economic move that basically can generate meaningful and huge financial returns, strengthen families, enhance global economic performance, which the UN has shown us so well. So to unlock this untapped potential, I think we all have to, as you've heard, we have to challenge old assumptions and start asking critical questions, such as, how does this opportunity look when considered through the lens of sex-based differences, which I've heard a few of you mention, and I think which has to become somehow a standard. I'd like to see how WHAM can help perhaps make that happen. We exist to drive transformation through initiatives like the WHAM Investment Collaborative. We're accelerating research, fostering innovation, and unlocking high growth opportunities. And that for us is, I think, what keeps us fueled every day. So I would welcome you to, first of all, to join us in the WHAM Investment Collaborative. If you have an interest, you can visit our website or follow us on social media, check out today's press release. Definitely stay tuned for more from WHAM as we continue to catalyze change. But most importantly, I thank the incredible passion, loyalty, and energy that this group and others who are involved with WHAM brings, because that's what's ultimately going to make a difference. So thank you for joining us today, and hope to see you all very, very soon.